Capitol Hill was quiet, blanketed in the deep stillness of midnight. Most offices were empty, lights off, and the halls silent. But inside one small corner office on the second floor of the Rayburn House office building, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat hunched over her desk, her eyes fixed on the dim glow of her laptop screen. Her staff had gone home hours ago. She should have too. But something had arrived earlier that evening. An unmarked envelope slipped under her door, and it was impossible to ignore. Inside it was a single black flash drive with a note that read, "You'll want to see this. America deserves the truth. Trust no one." Cautious but curious, Jasmine ran the drive through a private, air-gapped laptop. What popped up on the screen made her breath catch. Dozens of folders, each meticulously labeled, Rubio offshore transfers, Belarus contract files, hidden lobby donations, encrypted email strings. With trembling fingers, she clicked open the first folder. Her eyes scanned through spreadsheets and financial statements, millions of dollars funneled through a labyrinth of shell companies registered in Panama, Malta, and the Cayman Islands. The names tied to these accounts were disguised under aliases, but she noticed the same recurring initials in nearly every one, Mr. Digging deeper, she opened PDFs of internal communications between a Florida-based defense contractor and an Eastern European real estate firm. The recipient. An email account confirmed to belong to Senator Marco Rubio, but under a pseudonym. The tone was unmistakable, cold, transactional, and damning. One message caught her attention. Wire complete. Keep the name off public filings. Must be deniable. Jasmine's stomach dropped. This wasn't just some shady political donation. This was international laundering. Possibly federal crimes. Possibly more. Her instinct was to call someone, but who? If the sender's note was true, then the circle of trust was small. Very small. This was bigger than partisan politics. It was about betrayal at the highest levels of government. Jasmine grabbed a legal pad and began taking notes, cross-referencing names, writing down timelines, mapping financial trails. Hours passed, the sun slowly creeping toward the horizon. What started as a normal Thursday had just transformed into the beginning of a national scandal. She leaned back in her chair, exhausted but electrified. Every piece of evidence felt like a bombshell. This wasn't a whisper campaign. This was firepower. Rubio wasn't just hiding money. He was orchestrating it, using his political influence to secure contracts, then laundering kickbacks through ghost corporations. Jasmine looked out the window, watching the first light of dawn break across Washington, D.C. She knew the second she exposed this, it would set off a political earthquake. But she also knew something else. She had a duty to the people, and to the truth. There would be no turning back now. The House chamber was unusually tense that morning. Members filed in slowly, whispering among themselves, sensing something was off. The usual buzz of political routine had been replaced by unease, something unspoken, electric in the air. At the center of it all stood Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, standing near her desk with a thick, manila folder pressed tightly in her hand. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned with focus. She had barely slept. All night she had reviewed, double-checked, and triple-checked the files on that flash drive. There was no question in her mind anymore. The evidence was real. And it was about to go public. At exactly 9:07 a.m., she rose from her seat and requested to address the chamber. The speaker nodded. The gavel struck once. The chamber fell into silence. Madam Speaker, colleagues, and members of the press, Jasmine began, her voice firm but composed, I rise today not to argue legislation, but to bring before this House a matter of national integrity. Marco Rubio, seated on the Senate visitors' bench just behind the chamber floor, looked up from his phone, frowning. His staffer leaned in to whisper something in his ear, but he brushed him off with irritation. His name had not been mentioned, yet. I hold in my hands documented proof of financial misconduct and international corruption, Jasmine continued, raising the folder slightly. These are not rumors. These are verified bank records, emails, shell company filings, and correspondence that implicate a sitting senator of the United States Congress in crimes ranging from money laundering to misuse of office. The silence was shattered by a wave of gasps. Some representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few turned directly toward Rubio. The cameras panned in on his face, his expression now sharp and alert. He leaned forward, tension written across his brow. Jasmine opened the folder and pulled out several sheets, placing them on the podium. The senator used an encrypted offshore network to transfer millions of dollars through proxy accounts. The transactions were tied to no-bid contracts awarded to foreign companies with no prior government clearance. And these transfers did not occur once or twice, they occurred regularly, over the span of 7 years. A hand went up from the GOP side, trying to interject, but Jasmine didn't pause. She knew the moment had to hit with force, uninterrupted. One of those accounts, she continued, lifting a highlighted sheet, was traced to a bank in Cyprus under the name of a deceased relative. Another was linked to a Belize trust registered to an address that doesn't exist. And in these emails, signed with Senator Marco Rubio's secondary alias, are directives on how to keep these funds hidden from FEC audits and federal oversight. There was a brief moment of frozen silence. All eyes turned to Rubio, whose jaw clenched visibly. A few of his colleagues whispered to him urgently, but he didn't respond. He was staring at Jasmine with a glare that mixed disbelief and panic. Jasmine looked directly at him for the first time and asked, with no hint of fear, "Senator Rubio, do you deny wiring $2.3 million to a Belarusian contractor using your cousin's identity as a front?" The room exploded. Murmurs became shouts. Journalists sprang up from the press gallery, cameras flashing, tweets flying. The speaker banged the gavel repeatedly, calling for order, but the moment had already detonated like a bomb. Marco Rubio stood, finally, flanked by aides trying to usher him out quietly. But the damage was done. Jasmine stood there unmoved, her hands still resting on the evidence. For her, this wasn't theater. It was justice. And it had only just begun. Just hours after the explosive revelation on the House floor, an emergency session of the Congressional Ethics Committee was called, an almost unprecedented move that hadn't happened since the darkest days of the Nixon era. By mid-afternoon, the corridors of the Capitol were crawling with reporters, federal agents, aides whispering urgently into phones, and legal teams moving like chess pieces. The entire building felt like it had been struck by lightning. Something massive was unfolding in real time. And no one could predict where it would lead. In a high-security chamber deep inside the Capitol complex, the Ethics Committee assembled with grave urgency. The members, Democrats and Republicans alike, filed in with folders in hand, eyes steeled, faces pale. Jasmine Crockett had already submitted the files for review through official channels, and the digital copies had been analyzed by independent forensic auditors within hours. Every account, every offshore shell, every wire transfer, every alias had been cross-referenced and verified. The facts weren't just shocking, they were ironclad. Jasmine entered the hearing room calmly, dressed in a simple navy suit. She looked neither triumphant nor vengeful, just resolute. Her composure was in stark contrast to the chaos erupting outside, where pundits were dissecting her every word and social media was ablaze with hashtags like #Rubio Exposed and #Crockett Courage. Across the room, Marco Rubio sat with his lead counsel, visibly rattled but trying to hold onto an air of defiance. He wasn't speaking, just watching. Cold sweat glistened on his temple. His legal team had combed through the evidence all morning and found themselves cornered. None of their standard defenses would hold. There was no room for interpretation. The transactions were real, the emails authentic, the trail unmistakable. Chairwoman Hargrove, a seasoned lawmaker known for her iron discipline, opened the session with no ceremony. "We are convened today for emergency review of evidence implicating Senator Marco Rubio in serious breaches of ethical conduct, federal law, and constitutional duty." Jasmine was invited to speak first. She stepped up to the microphone with a stack of papers in hand and began with quiet authority. "I did not seek this confrontation. I was given evidence. I verified it. And now, in service to this country and this Congress, I present it before you all." She proceeded methodically, walking the committee through the timeline of financial transactions. Each exhibit was displayed on the screen behind her: bank records, email logs, contracts signed by shell company proxies. Here is the wire transfer from a defense firm in Georgia to an account in the Caymans. Here is the matching email from R.117 feet instructing the deal. And here is the signed contract awarding that company a $45 million deal after Rubio lobbied for a special exemption on their behalf. The committee sat in stunned silence. These weren't mere oversights. They weren't technical violations. They were deliberate, coordinated acts of corruption, and they had gone unchecked for nearly a decade. Rubio's lawyer stood and tried to object, suggesting the files could be manipulated. But Chairwoman Hargrove shut him down instantly. The files have been authenticated by 3 independent digital forensics experts, and the banks have confirmed the routing data. If you have contrary evidence, present it. Otherwise, sit down. Jasmine continued. It doesn't matter what party you belong to. This is about the soul of our democracy. And we cannot let this rot go unchallenged simply because it's inconvenient or politically messy. A murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber. Even Rubio's Republican colleagues looked away, embarrassed. No one wanted to be associated with what was unraveling. After 2 hours of testimony, cross-examination, and evidence presentation, the committee retreated for a closed-door deliberation. The tension was unbearable. Reporters waited outside. The public livestream had been paused. Inside the room, the vote was swift. Unanimous. 12-0. The committee returned to the chamber just before sunset. The chairwoman stood solemnly and announced, in light of overwhelming and substantiated evidence, the Ethics Committee hereby recommends the immediate expulsion of Senator Marco Rubio from the United States Congress and the referral of criminal charges to the Department of Justice. Rubio didn't even look up. He stared at the table, motionless, as if the weight of his own collapse had just settled on his shoulders. The room fell into silence, broken only by the distant sound of news helicopters circling overhead. Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She simply packed her folder, nodded respectfully to the chair, and walked out of the room with her head held high. The truth had been spoken. Justice had begun its course. By the next morning, the Capitol was surrounded by barricades and blanketed in flashing lights. Protesters lined the streets, some chanting for accountability, others just staring up at the massive LED news screens that played the headline over and over, Rubio expelled. DOJ to file charges within days. The footage of Jasmine Crockett standing on the House floor had already gone viral. Everywhere from college campuses to late-night talk shows, her name was being spoken with admiration and disbelief. A single congresswoman had exposed a decades-long scheme that had evaded watchdogs, oversight, and media scrutiny. And now, everything had changed. Inside the Capitol, the House gathered once again, this time for the formal vote to expel Marco Rubio from Congress. Although the Ethics Committee had already recommended it, the full vote was a constitutional requirement. Reporters lined the balcony rows. Live coverage ran on every major network. The world was watching, breath held. Rubio entered through the side door, surrounded by aides who looked more like bodyguards than political staffers. He wore a crisp suit, his expression hardened, jaw locked, but the shadows under his eyes told the real story. The swagger was gone. The smirk he once wore in every hearing had vanished. The corridors he once ruled now echoed with the sounds of his collapse. As the speaker took the roll call vote, one by one, lawmakers stood and declared their decision. Yay! 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 Even members of his own party, many of whom owed their careers to his early support, voted to remove him. When the count passed the threshold, the chamber erupted into murmurs. It was official. Marco Rubio was expelled from the United States Senate, the first such expulsion in modern history. He stood still for a moment, looking out across the chamber as if memorizing it. Not out of nostalgia, but disbelief. This wasn't how he thought it would end. He had imagined himself running for president again, maybe rising to even greater power. Instead, he was walking out under a storm cloud of disgrace. As he exited the chamber, cameras followed him down the steps. A crowd had gathered outside the building. Some cheered. Others shouted. One woman held a cardboard sign that read, "No more crooks in Congress." A little girl beside her clutched another that said simply, "Thank you, Jasmine." Back inside, Jasmine Crockett was asked if she had any closing remarks. She walked to the same podium where she had dropped the political equivalent of a nuclear bomb just 48 hours earlier. The room went quiet. "I didn't do this for a headline," she began. "I did it because the American people deserve truth. They deserve leadership that protects them, not profits from them. We took an oath to uphold the Constitution, not our careers. And if that means losing allies, so be it. If that means standing alone, so be it. Because one honest voice is louder than 100 liars in silence." Her words struck deep. Even some of her harshest critics sat in stunned silence, unable to deny the clarity of what they had just witnessed. The chamber didn't erupt. It didn't need to. The silence was louder than any applause. Outside, the ripple effect had already begun. Investigations into other members tied to Rubio's secret networks were underway. Subpoenas were being issued. A Senate seat would now be filled by special election. And across the country, voters, disillusioned for so long, were waking up to something rare: accountability. That night, Jasmine Crockett walked alone out of the Capitol and down its marble steps, her heels clicking against the stone. She didn't have a motorcade waiting. She didn't have security or fanfare. Just her satchel, her phone buzzing nonstop, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, against all odds, the truth wins. She paused at the base of the steps and looked out at the crowd still gathered in the distance. Someone shouted her name. She smiled softly, gave a nod, and kept walking forward into the humid DC night. In a political world that so often rewards silence, she had chosen the opposite.